that area that heavily for those type of processes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I may have to get you some additional information on that, but our practice is to have proper areas for those types of activities as well as fueling. So that includes clay lining, there are dedicated areas for the work so it can't occur anywhere. And it also includes any kind of curbing or berming that's required. So I can't, of course, speak to the specific design of it other than to say that we do. Thank you.
So the comment was just for the benefit, it was a portion that was not covered off in the presentation, and that was the basis of the question.
Okay, so I'm going to throw some information here. And
If I could just get your name and name.
Oh, yes, okay, yeah. My name is Ryan, and I'm here in Westwood. I live on Oceanstone Drive, which is probably as close as anyone can be to this site. So I have a few lists of information here, and I'm going to ask you a question at the end of that information, okay? So associated with asphalt production plants are emissions of arsenic, hexane, benzene, phenols, formaldehyde, cadmium, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Specifically, hexane is metabolized once it's absorbed into 2,5-hexane-dione, which is connected to polyneuropathy, which is a neurodegenerative disorder. Cadmium, it causes problems for the liver and the kidneys. It is associated with breast cancer, with renal problem, with osteoporosis. And the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons have been associated with low birth weight, premature birth, malformed heart in a baby, and a lower IQ growing up. Also, children exposed to BAHCs in the womb had a 24% chance, rather a 24% more likely to develop anxiety and depression in later life. So, given that information, would you like to have such a facility built near to your home?
Folks, I cannot emphasize enough. We'll just have to end the meeting. No, I have no folks, I have no troubles getting an answer to any questions you have, but we simply can't have a meeting where we're all going to be running amok for obvious reasons. We actually have to take minutes from this. We actually have to collect input about what people are feeling about this without the pressure of any clocking.
It's a public meeting. Let's be
Folks, so let's excuse me. So let's abide by that and see how we go.
Do you need to reiterate anything after all that?
No, I don't think I got that. Well, for the last 14 years, I've lived next to Ocean Contracting's asphalt plant, about 1 kilometer from that plant. I can say it's about 300 meters. My office in Burnside is about 300 meters from municipal's asphalt plant.
Okay, so you're saying you haven't had any problems and you're located next to one yourself. That's what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, yes.
So the residents of Blue Ridge, Virginia, when their plant was finished construction, the residents that were within 1 kilometer of it, 45% of them experienced some deterioration in their health. 18% of those experienced a rise in their blood pressure. 18% experienced sinus problems. 14% had headaches, and 9% experienced shortness of breath. And in that community as well, there's a 56% drop in property values. So those are concerns I'm sure we all share. Now, you said that you live close to one, you haven't had any problems. These residents did. So, frankly, my concern is not satisfied by your anecdotal testimony. And that's all I have.
Thank you.
My name is Trevor. I'm a resident, and I was gonna.
Why don't you just leave that on there, that'd be great. Otherwise, you can walk away with it.
Remember, nobody's lost.
Can you just get your name and community?
My name is Trevor Brown. I live up on the Highway 233 there. I got more of a statement. Okay, I work with chemicals on a daily basis. Okay, the prospect of having any kind of a tailing pond or a settling pond or anything like that is absolutely terrifying. The other problems are that the emissions in the air, okay, the water table, they say that, oh, well, everything's downhill from where this plant is going to be, okay? There's children that are, you know, they're going to experience the after effects of this in the years to come, okay? There's no guarantees that with any kind of expansion that you can keep those chemicals from getting out into the community or control the air that's there. It's far too close. You couldn't pick a spot that was more smack dab in the middle, you know, of our community. This is an absolutely horrifying idea. I mean, does anybody remember the Love Canal? Does anybody remember Correction, all the crap they dumped into the Gulf of Mexico? Has anybody ever been to the tar sands and seen what they're putting in the ground? The bitumen, that's what you're using, right? Bitumen? That's part of your process? Yes? Liquid asphalt, bitumen, right? Which is the absolute worst of the offset on heavy industry. Anywhere heavy industry is, and I'm sure everybody will agree with me, anywhere that there's heavy industry opens up the door. The minute you open the floodgates to these people, there's going to be an industrial complex sitting out here. Whether they tell you it is or not, this is just a back door in a loophole in order for a money grab. That's all it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm Bethany. I live in Seabrook. Councilors, staff, my fellow citizens, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I do have some concerns, questions about the application by Scotia Materials to request a change in the land use bylaw to enable their company to place a permanent asphalt plant on their lands north of Highway 103, south of Exit 5 of Highway 103. My first concern is with access to and from the lands of Scotia Materials across Crown lands. At this time, Scotia Materials has a right-of-way agreement with DNR over approximately 10 kilometers of Crown land. It is my understanding from Mr. McPherson of Scotia Materials that Scotia Materials would be required to provide upgrades to this road that would, to ensure the suitability of the safety and use to the mix of users that would utilize this road. These Crown lands are for recreation as well as resorts. My great concern is about safety for travelers on a road shared with trucks moving aggregate or asphalt materials to Highway 103. Currently, this is a narrow road. In its current state, it requires travelers to be very vigilant about oncoming traffic to avoid an accident. Scotia Materials has a site off Boulder Road in East Chester where they could set up an asphalt plant under the existing regulations in East Chester. Their site is adjacent to the on-off ramp at Exit 7, giving them easy and cost-effective access to 103. Mr. McPherson has kindly explained the odors and airborne particulates and the adherence to NSE requirements, so I will skip over to my next comment. My third concern arises out of the planning in this area of HRM. If councilors and council agree to a change of this order in the current land use bylaw for MR2 zone to allow the placement of an asphalt plant on the lands of Scotia Materials at the above-noted site, you will be setting a precedent to allow processing of resource materials on site in an MR zone, which is currently not permitted. By agreeing to the requested change in the land use bylaw, you would be opening the door, not just in HRM, but across the province. It is also my great concern that if this change in bylaw use is permitted, how long will it be before councillors are asked to permit this site to be converted to an industrial site? DNR is in the process of setting up a citizen engagement process for the St. Margaret's Bay District or the former Coldwater lands. I would ask that HRM and DNR work closely together in a review of the use of these lands and not make any decisions about changes to land use bylaws until this work is completed. In closing, I have a huge issue with what feels like piecemeal planning for this area by HR and council, rather than a big picture view of planning for this area, undertaken by the municipal and provincial representatives working together. On another planning matter, and this is my last comment, I would like to see the boundaries of the St. Margaret's Bay Planning and Advisory Committee expanded to include the watersheds of St. Margaret's Bay from exit 4 to Hammonds. Respectfully submit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be sometimes getting a little, if we just keep it down, I'll stop talking. Like you said,
My name is Trevor Harry, I'm a resident of Westwood Hills. My first questions are for Andrew Bone. What involvement the regional council had in the application and what are their guidelines?
Do you have a few more questions again? Maybe we just get all of them and then we'll times.
Well, I have 3 here for Andrew. Oh,
If you better said one at a time.
yeah, one at a time. Okay.
So regional council is the keeper of municipal plans for each area, and any request to amend the plan requires their approval. So they're involved at the beginning, at the initiation stage. So in this particular request, regional council initiated the request and asked us to look at the matter. And in the end, they will review all advice given to them, staff and to the public, and render a decision on the matter.
On page 3 of your report, you state that the plan amendment should only be considered when there is a reason to believe that there has been a change to the circumstances since the MPS was adopted or last reviewed, or in cases where circumstances are significantly different from situations the MPS anticipated. Is this your view or is this policy?
In general, that's the planning department's position, is that something has to have changed or not been considered in the original documents. In general, many of our plans do not specifically deal with asphalt plants. So, in this particular case, any request to change the document is a plan amendment. So, there's not, it doesn't appear to be any discussion in the plan. So, it will be council's call whether or not such a change is made.
Would RE7 of the MPS apply here?
RE7 is a factor, and for those, and I believe you're referring to the clause that talks about industrial development that has effluent related to it. Is that correct?
Well, the changes permitted in our MR1 and MR2 zones, specifically non-resource related light and service industrial uses.
Okay, so RE7 is the current policy set. We've identified council that under the current policy set, it's not permitted. So there would be an evaluation of to why it's not permitted, and we would provide advice to council in the final document, outlining the history as to why certain industries are not permitted, and give them the full picture.
Would an asphalt plant be considered light industrial use?
It's an industrial type of use, yes.
Because the Bedford MPS plan states that asphalt is a heavy industrial use.
Well, I guess every plan would treat an asphalt plant differently. The Bedford plan has no relevance in this area. The relevant document for this area is the Planning District's 1 and 3 municipal plan, and it doesn't identify anything related to asphalt.
Thank you very much. Mr. McPherson, aside from HRM staff, have you discussed your application with HRM councilors?
In what aspect? I guess there's general discussions with regard to what we're doing. We don't like anyone to be blindsided. So,
Would you have spoken to all of the councilors or just a select few?
If I might, so we can That's 3 questions. We can just get a real sense of it.
Answer the question.
Folks, I've got a long line of people here, which I don't mind, but if we get a sense of what the totality is, that would be good.
I'm just trying to find out the facts. And I think a lot of the people here would agree with my line of
I
questioning.
don't mind. The only thing I was asking you, you sort of said there's 3 questions, I don't know if we're
Oh,
into 20.
sorry,
or-
that was for Mr. Oh,
Okay, so if I could ask you just to, maybe we get a synopsis of this so we can have something as well.
what I want to do is go over his application that he submitted and some of the items that were put in there.
So how many questions do you have, sir?
Respect everyone's opinion, sir.
I just want to get a bit of a sense, folks, that's it.
I'm one of the closest residents. I'm within the 3,000 kilometer buffer. Meter, so I've got quite a few questions, okay. So I don't think you answered the question.
Yeah, so I would have spoken to the local area councillor, I've made him aware that we're coming forward with an application. No in-depth discussion with anyone else, other than perhaps mentioning that there's an application that's moving forward.
Did you discuss pricing of asphalt?
No.
Have you suggested that if you entered the market, you could supply asphalt to HRN at lower prices than that of the current rate?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I guess what I'm asking, have you suggested that you would have lower prices than the current suppliers of asphalt?
My goal would be to be as competitive as possible, otherwise I wouldn't be running a very responsible business. So my goal would be to always supply the most competitive price possible.
In your discussions, have you used your rationale in your application as your reasoning of wanting this application to go through?
Discussions with,
Councillors?
I would have shown the same rationale that the application would be the information that I had as far as what we're proposing.
You had a presentation on Scotia materials. The Register of Joint Stocks Office says that Northern Construction changed its name and imported the company from another jurisdiction. Northern Construction was in New Brunswick. Is Scotia Materials really Northern Construction?
No, Scotia Materials was Northern Construction Enterprises, and it was an incorporated company in New Brunswick. When I took over the management, I moved it here to Nova Scotia and had it reincorporated as Scotia Materials to reflect those changes. A shareholder that's involved in our company is part of the Belanger family. The Belanger family is from Grand Falls, New Brunswick, and they own a number of companies. They've been in business for about 79 years. They have 600 plus employees in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and they're very highly regarded. I don't know, does that answer the question?
Thank you. You have an approved quarry at Exit 7. Is there any zoning permitting for putting an asphalt plant at that site?
No, that site, from my understanding, we had an asphalt plant there.
I noticed there was no mention of that site in your application, but you mentioned in your application that this is an underserviced area, but that other site is only 13 miles away from your proposed site.
Yeah, when I mentioned underserviced in the application, I'm not referring to market underserviced, but the intent of the wording was to be underserviced as far as available lands for the location of an asphalt plant.
I contacted 2 of the companies that have asphalt plants in HRM to get understanding of market conditions and asphalt pricing. The general consensus was the demand for asphalt in the HRM area is stagnant. There is no need for an additional plant, as this is not a growing area, and present plants are operating at about 50% capacity, and the price charged in HRM is around $90. Why would you consider another asphalt plant with an HRM?
I can't speak to the numbers you provided or any of the other businesses' data. I guess the only point I can really make is I think Nova Scotia is probably the only province in Canada that has a government buy its own asphalt plant.
I note that Northern Construction sells its aggregate, which is public information, in New Brunswick about $20 a ton more than what the current HRM rate is. Do you have any comments on that?
I have no idea what their business practices.
Okay. You have an agreement with DNR. Would you provide the audience with a copy of that agreement?
That agreement is for the right-of-way is what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yes, I have been requested to release that. It is being reviewed to ensure that there's no competitive sensitivities in it. As soon as that's done, then I'll have it posted on our site, and I can let Andrew know that it's there if anyone wants to know.
Did you negotiate the right-of-way agreement for Scotia?
Yes, I did.
Who were you dealing with at the Department of Natural Resources, and what is their position and title?
There's a number of people. These agreements are quite complicated. It's not that one person makes a decision. I wish it was that easy.
Do you know what CHF asphalt mix means?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
It's actually the most basic asphalt product in Nova Scotia. I'm surprised that you would know what that is if you've been in the business. Thank you for your time.
Again, folks, if we can, let's get through some comments. I'd like to hear some thoughtful comments about this. So thank you. Give me your name and community. That would be terrific. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chris Turner. I live in Westwood Hills, subdivision, 152 California Road. This is your home. You live here. A lot of these people do not. I'd like to thank you first for all coming out. There are a few points I'd like to make this evening, and I'll keep it short. A long line here of people who want to say things. Really important things, more important to me. The first topic I want to talk about is with regard to the potential geoeconomic impact specific to the surrounding communities where we live. Geography really matters where we live, it drives everything. It's about the proximity of these locations near where we live. 360 meters is insufficient, it's wrong. We need to consider the real values that are stated by organizations like the EPA. Canada does not follow its own regulations well enough, and they often refer to the EPA regulations. So I'm going to share some information with you with regard to that. Put up your hands if you have a map. Share it with your friends, please. Anybody sitting next to you that may not? And in defense of Scotian, I would like to say one thing. This data that is on that, the only thing that pertains to Scotia specifically is the location of the plant, or the proposed plant. All the other information is still research-based and is based on a report done by Blue Ridge Environmental Group. Air quality tests show that emissions are above EPA standards for both benzene and arsenic. Have a look at your bottle. I'm going to throw this away. I talked better with it. If you look at that map, you see two large buffers, 3,000 meters and 3,500 meters. It clearly states in that report, which is for the record available, that within 3,000 meters of an asphalt plant similar to this, you're going to run into benzene issues. It states at 3,500 meters, you're going to run into arsenic issues. You want that in your community? Do you want that? No. let's forget about the environmental side, because what I understand is not really considered when this goes to reporting and there's recommendations provided to council. So I'm going to move away from the environmental side, even though it's the most important part. I'm going to talk about the economics of this, to this community. There is a process, and I would ask Mr. Bone if he's familiar with the hedonic modeling process for determining valuation of residents' home around areas that had experiencing encroachment from things like industrial sprawl. Been in practice since 1970. Best practice model. What it does is it values everybody's home. It looks at all the environment issues around it, good and bad, and then it begins to start to deduct the value from your home. When you deal with